Hello everyone, Jack here again for Forbidden Planet TV, and I'm joined by a very special guest, writer Charles Soule. How are you doing, Charles?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for having me on, and thanks for having me in the shop. I don't know if this is going to air before or after that, but I'm very excited to come see everybody. It should be great.
It certainly is. Yes, we're lucky enough that yourself, Charles, will be joining us at our London Megastore on Thursday, the 12th of March. It's going to be amazing to have you in store and to
Hmm.
have a signing. We're going to be celebrating, obviously, your incredible plethora of work. But in very special celebration, I believe it's out next week, the collected edition of Daredevil Cold Day in Hell, which is really
That's right.
exciting as well.
Yep.
Obviously, looking forward to having you there. This is your return to Daredevil. If we talk about Cold Day in Hell for a moment,
Yep.
after your incredible run a few years ago now, how has it been? How was it returning to Matt Murdock? How was it go back to Daredevil after all that time?
Well, the story of Cold Day in Hell is a little interesting because of the way that it was put together. I told that story with my good friend Steve McNiven, who is obviously a legendary artist who's drawn, Civil War and Old Man Logan and Death of Wolverine with me. Lots of really astonishingly incredible stories that Steve has done. And so anytime I get to work with him, I consider it to be a real. I feel very lucky about it. Steve and I have become very good friends over the years. We've done like a lot of storytelling together, which is, again, I feel very lucky about it. Um, and so when I finished my Daredevil run, which was in 2018, I'd been on the run for a long time, lots and lots of issues. I think it started in 2015.
It did,
So I'd
yeah.
been on for years. And when I wrapped up the story that I wanted to tell, there were like a few ideas that I had that I thought would be cool to do, but didn't really fit in the run that I was doing because that was basically all one story building up to these story points and came to a very natural ending. But Cold Day in Hell was sort of an outlier, and Steve and I were talking about what we might be able to do together because we had just come off or something that we had been doing or something that we'd been talking about, and we thought it would be fun to do something that on which we worked in a different way that didn't necessarily have monthly deadlines, was just sort of a big beautiful project that we could take all the time we needed on. And so I told him about the idea that I had what eventually became Cold Day in Hell, which was sort of a kind of a Dark Knight Returns riff on Daredevil, on Matt Murdock. And Steve liked it, and so we started talking about it and kind of building up the story and shaping it. And one of the great things about comics is that it's so collaborative. So you're connecting with people creatively and getting their way of seeing stuff and their way of seeing ideas, and it becomes additive to the way you see it. Steve brought things that I would never have brought to the table, and vice versa. So because we've worked together for so long, we were able to kind of like really be in sync, really trust each other in terms of what we were going to do. And so there was a lot of kind of laying back in the creative process in a way that I don't always do on all of my books that I do. Like I'm usually a full script guy, which for anyone who doesn't know is like panel one, this happens, this is the dialogue. Panel two, this happens, this is the dialogue. For Cold Day in Hell, it was more like page one or page two or pages 2 through 4. This is what's happening in the story. Here's some sample dialogue. This is what they'll be talking about. But then Steve took that and went away, and he created these incredible pages that are based on a 16 panel grid, which is like Olympic level, like artistic craziness. It's not something that you see very often because it means that the page is sometimes composed of these tiny little instance of moments as opposed to the like a big splash page or a 3 panel page where you kind of it's just 3 beats and they're all very kind of fleshed out. These are more like slicing time into these tiny fractions in a way that comics is capable of doing. But it's really hard. You have to have a complete control of your visual storytelling. And Steve, since he's a genius, was able to do it. And what that meant for me, though, is that I then had to go and do the same thing. I had to slice up the dialogue into these tiny snippets and sometimes just a word here. A lot of times I left the dialogue out, just let the art speak for itself. And and so when we were creating this project, it ended up almost being like musical, or we're both jazz fans, and so we talked about it as if it was jazz. Like he would take a solo, I would take a solo, we would be communicating, we would be finding ways to always refine, always tweak, always make it better. So So that's how we made this project. And based on what I just said, I don't think it will surprise you when I say that it took us 7 years. We started this book in 2018, just after I finished my run, and we didn't work on it every second of every day, but it was sort of in between other projects for us and when we could. And so 7 years, and I think it really shows in the finished project. It's like meticulous. We both really wanted to bring our AAA game to the story, and I'm so proud of it and so glad it's getting this beautiful hardcover that everybody's going to be able to read.
You're right. The effort in there is, so prevalent. It is an incredible 3 issue mini. I'm very lucky. I do a new comic book day video here at Forbidden Planet, and every single time an issue of that dropped, it was just such a wonder to have on the shelf. It is, added to that annals, as you said, of like Dark Knight Returns, and even Steve's other work, Old Man Logan, like these sort of
Yep.
dystopian old man versions of these characters, and
Mm-hmm.
getting to give them that one last hurrah. It's interesting you mentioned the jazz thing. You've mentioned that other places as well,
Mm-hmm.
because you've worked together so much, and this was such a different collaboration, such over such an extended period of time. As you say, did you guys challenge each other in ways you didn't get to do on other projects as well, without the deadlines and things like that? Did you feel much more like you could experiment? Did it change a lot from its original inception, or was it always sort of progressing in that way?
It changed until the very last dialogue balloon,
Mm.
that we, like, up until the very last minute when it was like, guys, we have to send this thing to press, because there was always another idea you could have. The way that we were thinking about the story, like the basic structure of the story, the 3 issues. So the book is 3 oversized issues. It's 3 30-page issues. So it ends up being a 90-page story, which has a lot, very much a 3 act structure, has a lot of heft to it. It definitely feels like a substantial read, particularly because, again, it's the 16 panel grid, which means you get a lot. If a standard comics page perhaps has four panels, each of which is telling a piece of the story, this now has 16 panels, and so it's not exactly 4 times as much visual information to decode and digest and understand the story of, but it's certainly more, I think, than the 4 panel version. So it's dense in a way, like it's a like a meaty read mentally, which I think is, again, something that we wanted to do from the beginning. Steve in particular wanted to do that, and but like how that happens, right? It's a constant back and forth, and a constant, like, there's a lot of iterating in when we were making this book. So here's the version of idea A, and then Steve draws something, and that makes that version B, and then I'm able to take it with dialogue and turn it to C, and then there's maybe even a D and an E beyond that, depending on what's going on. So there's only a few artists that I work with that I think I could do something like this with, because a lot of it is trust. I mean, the first thing we ever did together was over a decade ago with Death of Wolverine, and you just get to a point where I know what Steve can do, and Steve knows what I can do, and we just trust each other to do that. And it was really about saying from the beginning that this was going to be both of us doing this work at the absolute top of our ability.
It certainly delivers. I'll you might get bored of me saying how much I enjoyed it by the end of this, but it really is just one of those books that uh, it's going to be so wonderful to be able to point to as a bit of an evergreen on the shelf of, not just for Daredevil, but I think for both of your works. It really was uh, such an incredible epic journey. You mentioned like the denseness of the book, and I think that's so on the money, because it feels like such a lived in world.
Mm-hmm.
Cold Day in Hell, obviously, for those of you who don't know, who haven't had the chance to read it yet, it's a dystopian version of the world. It's post-war. Quite a catastrophic global conflict has left the world in much disarray. There's no wireless technology and things like that, and
Mm-hmm.
it's very much returns to a level of tactility. New York's always a big character for Daredevil in
Mm-hmm.
itself as a city. It's clearly very deliberate and meaningful to put Matt in a situation that is so tactile, that has returned
Mm-hmm.
to a city full of wires, and that is so reliant more on feel and sense, as Daredevil is. What did putting Matt in that world unlock for you guys in the storytelling? How much did his environment impact the way you wanted to tell the story and show off New York, and those facets of his character?
As you pointed out, New York City is almost always one of the main characters in the Daredevil story. There are times he's gone to San Francisco, there's times he's gone to Japan, so on and so forth. But usually it's New York, usually it's Hell's Kitchen. And one of the things that I always liked about the early Daredevil stories that I read, particularly, the Miller stories, Frank Miller stories, but also even before that, the Stan Lee stuff, and then moving forward into Bendis's and all the incredible runs on this character that have happened, is that New York feels very dangerous, and it feels like a place where bad things happen. It feels like the version of New York that I think Daredevil lives in is similar to like, the Taxi Driver, the sort of 1970s grindhouse version of New York, which isn't really reflected in present day New York City all that much. And even if you think about um the sort of present day Marvel universe, it's very like, it's very high tech. It's like almost like a science fiction environment. And in some ways that tracks reality, and that's cool and it should. But I think for Daredevil, for like the version of Daredevil that I really think is impactful, it is the place that is more, as you said, tactile. I mean, he has this, his radar sense. He has the ability to kind of experience the environment through his heightened senses, and so that is touch and smells and the things he hears, and like the sort of the scentscape of the city is really important. And while, believe me, New York City can smell very bad in the present day for sure, there was just something about the idea of like tearing it down, and the thought that when Daredevil gets his powers back, when Matt Murdock, so this is not really much of a spoiler, but very early in the story, a dirty bomb goes off in Hell's Kitchen where Matt is working as he runs a soup kitchen there. And because dirty bomb is radioactive, he inhales that gas and his powers are reactivated for a little while. And so there's a moment when he snapped back into being able to hear everything around him, and in the way that Daredevil can. And it's a moment of him understanding how much the city is hurting and how much the city needs him. And I don't know. I think if you had a digital version of New York, a lot of that would be, he wouldn't be hearing it because people wouldn't be saying it. And so it just, I don't know. It just felt right to have the city be hurt and to have the person who helps it, one of the people who helps it, come back to try to save the day.
I also think that, as you said, it is a city that he's hurting with, and has adapted to in his new way of living until the sort of start of the story, and saying he relearns. Your original run on Daredevil handles New York City, obviously quite prevalently as well, especially with
Mm-hmm.
things like Mayor Fisk.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really interesting as a reader seeing. I know that Cold Day in Hell is set in sort of a elseworldy dystopian kind of future, but you can see the through lines of your Matt in Cold Day in Hell, I think, very well.
Mm-hmm.
It's a city at the end of your run, he doesn't feel like he understands very well. He has a bit of a disconnect with Wilson Fisk becoming mayor, and reconciling that with himself, and his mission. And I think being able to see that mission continued and his adaptability to this new New York, and how he is the essence of Matt's carried through really well. So it's wonderful to get those sort of two, almost like a double bookend to the series in a way.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to think about. Like because if I think, well, I mean, I'm trying to think of an example of when this happened. I mean, you could argue that Scott Snyder's kind of doing it now with Absolute, but like a writer returns to a character and has a deeply different take on that character, as opposed to basically they have the understanding of the character whenever they come to it, right? I would say that Frank Miller sort of dipped in and out of Daredevil a lot. Brian Michael Bendis dipped in and out of Daredevil a fair amount after his original run, and that always felt pretty consistent. Like he was
Mm.
always writing the same version of it. I think that's something that I do. The Matt and Cold Dan Hell, even though he's probably, I think of him as being 67 years old for whatever reason. That's the age I've decided he is in the book. Um, is not that different from the guy probably in his 30s that you see in my run. He's just got more road behind him. And Daredevil was a phase in his life, a very, very, very important phase in his life that lasted a long time. But eventually, because his powers again are radiation based, they sort of faded. So but it's, for me, it's definitely the same guy. And I don't, I'm trying to think if it was like, okay, now you're going to write Daredevil like it's a slapstick comedy or something like that. I don't know that I could do it. I think that Daredevil is a character that I've written so much that I'm so connected with in my career and also personally that it would be very hard to write a different version of him. And I don't even know if I'd want to. Like the sense of the character you write is part of what people are looking for from you. Your audience is looking for that.
Yeah, and it is palpable. I think your connection to Daredevil and because it's fair to say that your run has had a major lasting impact on Daredevil over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
Certainly, in the last decade, it's incredible. And I'll touch on that again in a moment, um, because we've got some new additions. It's come back, which
Yeah.
is really
Yeah.
lovely.
It's really cool. Yeah.
Yeah, how is? Do you know what we'll do it now? How brilliant is it to actually have it all back on the shelf again in these brilliant new compact editions?
It's amazing. I was told they were going to do this last year, and I've seen like they send me images of the covers and like bits and pieces, but I didn't actually get to hold them in my hands until last week or week before last. There was a Marvel Summit in New York City, and so a bunch of the writers and artists came into New York to meet with the editors and like talk about upcoming things, and they had. Copies of that set, the 3 volume set of my entire run with Ron Garney and other incredible artists. Uh, I had never seen it in the flesh, so to speak. I had never held it, and so they had a set to give to me. And so they're, I mean, you just lifted them. They have this like beautiful heft to them. They feel very substantial. It's the whole run, very easy to pick up and collect and read through. And I've been hearing that people who missed out, there was a big omnibus collection. Hearing people are excited about being able to get it in a new way, and it's driven by the. I'm sure this was something on your list, but the Daredevil Born Again TV show is so far very very deeply inspired by that run. Muse, Mayor Fisk, all these different elements are parts that were created in the run I did with Ron. So I think there's a reason Marvel's bringing it back now, but for me, you always want your work to be available to people to appreciate. And there's always going to be digital versions. There's always going to be trades. There's always going to be back issue bins and all that stuff. But having it come back in this truly beautiful and easy to kind of acquire and throw in your backpack or whatever version really, really makes me happy. It's pretty great.
Well, it's funny you mentioned the omnibus version because that's how I read the run. I was
Okay.
fortunate enough to pick up that massive omni. It was like one of the first omnibuses I ever got. But it is always, it's a difficult one to be able to recommend to people if I don't have access to back issues because it's like it's
Yeah.
incredible. You go find it somewhere,
Yeah.
and now
Yeah.
to have it back on the shelf again in print, as you say, following suit with a great run of different compact editions from different companies as well. I think there's been a big
Hmm.
push for making not just new books, but prolific runs more accessible. And it's brilliant. It's happened to the entire run.
Yeah.
There's been some times where people will cherry pick stories and just put bits and pieces out. So you'll be able to actually sit down again and have the whole thing, and as you say, sling it in your backpack and take it with you is brilliant. Um,
Yeah, I'm hopeful. Obviously, I'm hopeful like for myself that it does really well, but
yes,
I think it is a there's this is considered a bit of like a let's see how it goes kind of thing, in terms of doing it for other runs, but they're always experimenting with format. They're always experimenting with ways to get signature runs on titles out. And this is, if it does well, I'm sure, I'm not speaking with any inside knowledge, but I would be shocked if we didn't see more things like this for signature runs or long runs or whatever, alongside the omnibuses, which are, and then epic collections. And, I think the only thing is that I wish the run, like, so I don't know if they're going to reprint that omnibus, is what I'm saying, which is a bummer because I hear about it all the time. That or the Darth Vader omnibus, like, the runs of mine that had an omnibus collection, which makes me really happy, but you can't get them anymore. And so I don't know that Marvel is, I think they are, I think the intentional scarcity of those is part of what makes them cool. And so I don't know if we'll ever see that version again. Who knows? But we'll get these new compact editions, and I think that those might be the ones that live forever. Which would be great by me.
the key thing is being able to have access to them in some form or another, sort of in perpetuity.
Yep. Yep.
Because it is one of those series. I think, as you said, now with Born Again, and we'll have a chat about that in a moment. But it does sit very much in the sort of Daredevil zeitgeist, really heavily. Even now, Mayor Fisk wasn't just part of your run; it was something that was huge in Marvel Comics for, up
Yep.
until semi recently,
Yeah,
really.
it was line wide, you know, Spider-Man and just all the street books, street level books,
Yeah.
which is, you know, I've been at Marvel for a long time now, and I will tell you, it is difficult to create lasting changes that ripple throughout the entire universe. You know, like there's so much going on all the time. You know, you create a new cool new, I don't know, what would the thing be? A cool new movie theater, and you're like, everybody should go use this movie theater. That's where Captain America should go, or whatever. And then they just don't, because writers have their own stories to tell, and it's kind of tough to keep track of everything and so on. So having a change like that, Mayor Fisk, you know, that could easily have been undone quickly by Chip or by anybody, Chip Zdarsky, who followed me on Daredevil, or you know, anybody who wanted it to be different, and then to have it last for many years really felt great. It's cool.
Yeah, it's cool, and it adds, I think, for readers, it adds a level of continuity that you sometimes don't get when runs change
Mm-hmm.
hands, or when you're sort of trying to get into books. I think having
Yep.
those sort of key points to be like, oh, he's the mayor everywhere. Like it
Yeah.
is an
Yeah.
incredible legacy to leave, because for so many people getting into books, that's something that they'll always
Mm-hmm.
had. If that make, you know, they'll
Yes.
always have been
Had.
have
Yes,
been had.
exactly. You know, I'm. It's a very. I I still am doing the job regularly.
Mm,
Like I'm still working a lot at Marvel and so on. So I try not to get too reflective about it, but I suspect there may be a time when I sit back and think about those things, whether they're Daredevil or Star Wars or, you know, Wolverine, or, you know, the way that choices that are made, that I was fortunate enough to be able to make with the wonderful artists that I work with, and the way they did affect the Marvel line for a while, or, you know, the way people think about the characters. It's it's one of the best things about the job, the way that a story choice that you make when you're sitting around, you know, putting stuff in your notebook, thinking about what you're going to do, and then it ends up connecting with so many different people in so many different ways. I mean, the work that Ron Garney and I did to create Muse, for example, is now, you know, millions and millions of people know that character because of the television show, and it it's a lot to take in, right? It's a lot to think about, but it's also pretty wonderful.
well, you actually you mentioned in your interview on Screen Crush about seeing Muse cosplayers specifically sort of freaking you out a little bit, because obviously he's
Yep.
a
Yep.
horrific character,
Yep. Yep. Real
not a
bad.
good guy. Like,
Nope.
yeah, there must be something just so incredible about seeing it, and it's so cool again that so much of it is turning up in Born Again. I know yourself were involved in the second season as the sort of law uh
Yeah.
correspondent for it. You were the
Like it's kind of like they might have a legal plot, like
mm,
a courtroom plot or something like that. And I am extremely NDA'd, so I can't talk about it in any detail. But
right, yeah.
it's probably not surprising to think that Daredevil might have some legal aspects involved. And so I because I'd worked on the character and I knew people involved and so on, they asked me to um, every once in a while like give some insight into the way things might work in either the Daredevil world or the real world from a legal perspective. So it wasn't like I was writing episodes or anything like that, but I am excited to see the season, just like everybody else. I've read it, but I haven't watched it, and it's obviously a big deal to see it when it's all sort of shined up and all the things are happening in real life. So that's any minute too. I think it's next month soon.
It is indeed.
Um,
Yes, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I
So
don't think the week
it's
after
very,
deciding.
yeah, it's very cool. I think people who liked season one are going to love season two, and there's a lot of cool twists and turns, and it's a lot of great action, and it should be awesome.
For those who don't know, you yourself worked as a lawyer,
Oh
as
yeah,
well
right.
for many years, which
Mhm.
was such a big part of your run on Daredevil.
Yep.
So how does it feel sort of colliding those worlds now, not just in writing Daredevil, but also looking after the Daredevil show? Obviously, you said you didn't write anything, but it's a bit of a full circle moment getting to tackle it um,
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
both aspects quite a lot.
Yes. It's one of these things that's so like rarefied air almost, like the idea that I wrote a story again, like all these stories all start with I do all my work in these notebooks, right? And I will go to a coffee shop, or I'll go, you know, for a walk and, you know, sit in the park or go to the bar or wherever I am. And it all sort of starts with one of those and like a pencil, and I just am making things up. And to think that the path between me thinking, oh, you know, it'd be pretty wild, as if Fisk became the mayor, writing that down, pitching it at a Marvel Summit, getting everybody on board, going. That leads to me talking to being on set, talking to the showrunner about how to implement some of these ideas, like the and knowing again that like millions of people are going to be watching it and are going to be thinking about it, and whether they know that there's a through line between the things they're seeing on the screen and me sitting at that bar or whatever years before almost doesn't really matter to me, because I think for the vast majority of the audience watching Daredevil Born Again, they will have no idea that I had anything to do with it. Even if they watch the credits, they just won't, right? It'll just be something cool that's happening on the screen. Um, but all know that my work and Ron's work and the work of the artists and everybody uh, did make it out into sort of the pulp culture and the idea sphere and so on. And it's the validation of the work and the thought that goes into it and all the time, and just knowing that little idea that I had sitting at that bar has gone out and is now in the minds of millions of people. I mean, that's kind of one of the reasons why you do it, really.
Yeah, and it's well deserved. You've had an incredible career in comics, I say even after, especially after Daredevil, with your
Mm,
books over at Image with 8 Billion Genies and Lucky
yep.
Devils, and it is fantastic to see you and Ron and all the other creators that worked on that run, sort of getting your flowers and getting to have those things put on the screen. Because as comic readers, people coming in and being like, "Oh my god, that's Muse!" Like that's great. And then we have the tail end of that where we have new readers coming in and being like, there's a massive sicko in that Daredevil series.
Hmm.
Where do I go to get it?" And you're like, "Here
Yep.
you
Oh,
go."
here you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, and seeing cosplayers, one of the other things that I saw that was cool, I actually, this is another thing I found out at the Marvel Summit, is that they're making a really, really slick Muse action figure, which again is just, it's not the first time that something like that's happened for me. I've had figures in Star Wars,
Mm.
Logan figures, whatever, like it's happened, but it's still awesome. It's so cool, particularly because that one, again, is an idea that I just came up with one day. And then Ron delivered that design, which I think is absolutely iconic and completely unique, and really feels exactly the way it's supposed to feel, like deeply unsettling, but also you get that the guy's a street artist. Like it all kind of tracks. And so it's like I was saying before, it's really difficult to create ideas that make it off the page, basically, that get out to a larger audience. I love the comics audience, but it is not the same as the audience for film and TV. It just isn't. And so knowing that the idea can be vetted across so many things that need to happen before it can get into film or TV, is wild. And now seeing cosplayers at shows, you mentioned it before, like it's Muse is a creepy character. He's a serial killer artist, and seeing people who you always wonder when somebody comes up to you at a convention dressed as Muse, and I'm sure it's true for other people who've created real nasty villains. Seeing people cosplay them, it's interesting, right? That people connect with this character enough to want to do that. But no complaints, especially, it's like I've been saying all along, it's really hard to create things that connect with people that deeply. Whether it's cosplay or tattoos sometimes, or
Mm.
whatever, fan letters, anything. It's hard to do it, and so I'm thrilled to see it, and I'm expecting to see. Convention season starts for me in a few weeks this year, and I'm assuming I'm going to see a lot of Muse this year.
I'm sure you will. I'm hopeful a couple of blind spot cosplays will turn up as well. To be
Now
fair,
that would be the next real big one for me, would be Blind Spot showing up.
that's what
For
I'm
those who
after.
don't know, Blind Spot was one of the other big element that I added to Daredevil's mythology in my run, was I gave him an apprentice, and I don't like using the term sidekick for Blind Spot, because he really wasn't. He was an apprentice. He was somebody who was trying to learn from what Daredevil does, and I think he's awesome. A lot of people really really like him. I know that it's been discussed. It's just about when would make sense, in the life of the TV version of the character, to bring something like that in. And I would be thrilled. I don't have any advanced knowledge of it happening, but believe me, I'd be really excited for Blind Spot to show up.
Yeah, that'd be sick. Yeah, fingers crossed that happens because
Yeah, yeah.
it'd be so
Hmm.
awesome. Blind spot action figures. That's what I'm after. That's news
Yeah,
is.
no, it'd be
I'm
great.
after
It'd be cool.
some.
Um, not impossible. I mean, there's a lot of attention on that run. A lot of people who make
Mm.
the shows have read it, and so we'll see. We'll just see.
And now a lot more people get to read it as well. So it's all gonna it's the
Hmm.
right time, especially with as Cold Day in Hell literally coming out next week as well. It's such an incredible body of work for Daredevil. Obviously, I've just mentioned as well loads of other work aside from Daredevil. I appreciate this has been quite a Daredevil centric interview
Sure,
in
sure.
prep for the signing. Another book that you've got coming out with Marvel as well is your involvement in Death Spiral, Amazing
Yes,
Spiral,
right,
Death
exactly.
Spiral as well.
Yep.
Coming off of your Eddie Brock Carnage run,
Hmm.
which are a very different direction for both of those
Yep,
characters.
absolutely.
How much fun has that been to work on? Obviously, Joe Kelly's Spider-Man run's been going on. There's Al Ewing's Venom run. How's it been inserting yourself and you, Eddie, and, and Carnage
Yep.
into that
I mean, it's
space?
great. Al and Joe are awesome. I've known Al for a long, long time and have worked with him in the past on things. Joe is somebody I've met more recently, kind of during this time working on the Carnage book and then on into Death Spiral. But I think he's the best, And so we, the three of us, really clicked well. And Marvel has been great about letting us tell a story that's really quite dark. It's yet another serial killer story. I guess that's all I know how to do. But the idea here, I'm not sure how much has been released about what Death Spiral is, and I don't want to spoil anything from the story. But like
Yeah, of course.
what we figured out is that essentially, MJ, Peter, and Eddie Brock, and Carnage and Venom are essentially kind of like they're a family. They're a family unit in a way. Very dysfunctional, but they have all of the ties and connections that you would see in a typical family. And so we wanted to acknowledge that very directly. Like it's a very key element of the story, but also, you throw things against that structure and see how you can break it up, how you can make it intense, how you can test it. And so that's where Torment comes in. And so Torment is the villain of the piece. I'm pretty sure that's been announced at least.
Yes.
He's a new character. He's a new villain. He does some really, really terrible things in this book. You meet him for the first time in Death Spiral #1, which I think is out it's next week, actually,
It
pretty
is indeed.
sure. And then it goes on. The story weaves through issues of Amazing Spider-Man and Venom, and then there's for over 8 issues, and then there's a final like ending part, which is I wrote, which is called Body Count, which is about sort of the epilogue to the story. So through this, I got to write my first issue of Amazing Spider-Man, which was fun. I'd never done that before. And I wrote an issue of Venom that Al graciously let me do. So the nice thing about this is all three of us wrote chunks of that Death Spiral #1, and then we each took 3 parts of the next 9 parts. So all three of us have a third of it. So it really is a joint effort. It's been interesting for me to see how truly devoted and passionate Spider fans are, because it's a world it's one of the few offices I haven't really done any work for at Marvel, and so seeing how much people really, really care about what happens to Peter, his ongoing saga. It shouldn't be news to me. Like what's more obvious than people love Spider-Man, but it's one thing to know it like up here, and it's another thing to feel it here, which is what I'm starting to feel now. So I hope people will be um, excited about reading a story like this involving these people. It really puts them through their paces in a way that I think is really cool and sets up some really interesting things for down the road. So it's
Uh,
great stuff.
we certainly are excited. I'm keeping up very heavily with the ongoing, so it's nice to see them all collating. Finally, they've had spent quite a bit of time away from each other, and the world's been building around them for quite some
Hmm.
time. And I hadn't really twigged that family dynamic, but that's so interesting to hear because it is, as you say, immensely dysfunctional. But you kind of see them, or the way at least we've been receiving them has been quite separate entities for quite a while. So getting to see them come
Hmm.
back together again, I think is going to be really exciting.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah,
we hope so. It's great. I mean, I've read it all, and it's very cool. So I think people are going to have a good time with it.
and you're right. That is out next week as well. So two
Mm.
two big Charles Soule books to pick up off the shelf next week, which is great.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. I have I have an assistant. I have somebody who helps me with everything that I'm doing, and one of his jobs is to keep my website updated with all my weekly releases. And he has a hard time with it because there's not that he's very skilled, he does a great job, but like there's always stuff, whether it's new editions of past material like those trades we were talking about, a new hardcover, a new single issue. Like I feel so fortunate. I'm knocking on wood right now, that I get to tell so many stories, because you've got Marvel stuff, you've got Star Wars stuff, and you also have my creator own work, plus novels. And so it feels like almost every week, if not every week, there's something new for me, which what a lucky thing. And I never stop thinking about how fortunate I am to have that kind of career.
Well, and it is an incredible career. It truly is. And it's so wonderful to get to talk to you about it. Obviously, as I said, very Daredevil centric today, but I'm sure when you come and visit in March, we'll be able to chat a bit more about everything.
Yep, I look
And
forward to it. It's funny, the first time I went to Forbidden Planet, I don't think it was the current location. I think it was maybe the location before, possibly. It wasn't in a basement. It was like on a ground floor somewhere in London. But it was when I bought the single, the volumes of like the issues basically of um, DK2, which was the Dark Knight Returns sequel,
yeah, yeah,
uh,
yeah.
that Frank Miller and Lynn Varley did. And so that's quite a while ago, when that came out. But that was my first exposure to Forbidden Planet, and I really thought it was just a hell of a comic book store. Like it was great. At the time, I was living in Philadelphia, so I wasn't in New York City. I didn't know comic shops could be like that. Like the shops in Philly were sort of the smaller, just smaller. Nothing wrong with that, but just not as epic as Forbidden Planet was. And so it's always been kind of you're in London, you swing by, you see what's going on. And I've attempted to, we've tried to make a signing work in the past a couple times, and it hasn't really worked out. But now finally it will. And I love being in London, and I think it's going to be great to meet everybody and say hello to folks.
We're over the moon to be having you in, and so many people are excited already on our social pages. Everyone's buzzing that they get to come and meet
Great,
you, and so
great,
many people are excited to
fantastic,
bring parts of your other work to get signed as well. So I think
fantastic.
it's going
Yep,
to be an amazing event.
yep.
That is once again on Thursday, March 12th. There'll be a link in the description of this video with all the details, and we're going to be sharing it out loads ahead of the signing as well. Charles, thank you so much for your time today. It's been so wonderful getting to chat with you.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure. And I look forward to doing it in person in really not that long, in less than a month. I'll see you
Yeah.
soon.
Oh, yes, we'll see you in 3 weeks' time. Thanks so much, everybody, for watching. Do make sure you keep your calendars free and you come and see us on Thursday, March 12th, and say hi to Charles. And we're going to have plenty of copies of Cold Day in Hell and the new editions of Daredevil, and some of your Star Wars work, some of your novels. It's going to be a huge celebration, so we're really excited that we get to share it
Yeah,
with everybody.
sounds great. Sounds perfect.
Great. Thanks so much again, and we'll see you soon. Thanks.
If you're enjoying watching Forbidden Planet TV and you're enjoying watching us talk to the world's most interesting and accomplished filmmakers, authors, artists, musicians, creators, subscribe right here. See you soon.